Hi, this is Dave McComb. We're with the GIST Council for February 13th, 2020. Today we're going to talk about events, but the first thing we're going to do is introduce everybody that's in the room and have them just say a word or two about how they're using or planning on using GIST. I'm going to start at the top of the list. First come, first serve. Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter Winstanley, and I'm the new kid on the block at Semantic Arts, where I'm part of the ontologists team. And with regard to planning on using GIST, obviously, I'm planning to use it because it's part of the specific toolkit of the team.
Excellent, thank you. Jonathan.
Jonathan Storm, I'm planning on using GIST for my personal software development and might use it at my employers, S&P Global.
Excellent. Thank you. Matthias.
Hey, hi. I'm Matthias, currently a French intern at WrangleWorks, and I'm using GIST right now to build a product ontology, and probably will move on to some transaction. I don't know yet. Yep.
Excellent. Doug.
Doug Needham. I'm with Core Wireless, IoT company.
Okay.
And how I'm planning on using GIST is not sure yet, but want to see how it can help with some of our deeper analytics once we get to that point.
Cool. And there is an IoT module in GIST. I don't know if you found that yet, but we can talk about that later. Cheryl. We're not hearing you. It looks like you're unmuted, so maybe your microphone volume is turned down. Well, I'm gonna come back to you at the end, Cheryl, because we're not hearing you. Mark Auska.
This is Mark Auska, fellow at Semantic Arts, and my mission in life is to lower the barrier to entry for semantics, and GIST is a key component of that.
Very cool. Thank you, Michael.
Hi, yeah, this is Michael Escheld. I've been working with GIST for about almost 10 years now in lots of different industry projects.
Cool. Rebecca. You're muted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Eunice. I'm an ontologist at Semantic Arts, and I use GIST in my client projects. I'm also working with my colleagues at Semantic Arts on standardizing a process for reviewing GIST issues, triaging them, and having regular GIST releases with new development.
Great, thank you. Mark Wallace.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Wallace. I've been with Semantic Arts for 2 years. I'm an ontologist, and I've been using GIST for those entire 2 years on multiple client projects.
Excellent. Phil.
Hi, Phil Lonfafame, Centera Healthcare. We're moving along with semantics slowly and showing some progress. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Thanks for showing up. Micah.
Hi, this is Micah. I work at Semantic Arts, and I've been using GIST for as long as I've been there on various client projects.
Very good. Fabian.
So Fabien from Schneider Electric in France. We have a product ontology that is partly based on GIST, so we are daily users of GIST.
Very cool. Dan.
I'm Dan Carey. I'm a senior ontologist at Semantic Arts, and I'm a daily GIST user.
Great. And Dougal, are you calling in from down under?
I sure am. Yep, at 5 in the morning.
Wow.
Dougal Watt, CTO of Meaningful Technology, a I use just as the upper ontology for our platform every day.
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks for joining us, getting up so early. And John Cowan. You might be still muted, John. We're going to go back to Cheryl and see if Cheryl figured out her microphone. I think I heard something there. Was that you, Cheryl? And
She put a little something in the chat, Dave. Sorry, my microphone isn't working. I'm an accounting professor at Grand Valley State University. I'll be working with Semantic Arts while on sabbatical starting in August, and we'll be comparing GIST to the REA ontology in a research paper.
Right on. Great.
John's here now. Can you hear me now?
We can. Thanks.
Great. Okay. My interest in GIST is purely personal. I have a personal project in mind that will involve using a subset of it to classify things.
Okay. Sounds very mysterious, but there you go. And then
basically the idea so that you can remember random bits of knowledge which people currently stuff into things like notes and and email and so forth and so on, and then you can categorize them using your own development off the GIST hierarchy.
Okay, cool. And Steve Stewart. Are you muted?
He just sent me a chat that he's having trouble with audio.
Yep. Okay, well, we'll just get started.
People can't always do their audio by calling in.
Yeah, it's true. So let me say a few words about, figure out how to get this stuff out of my screen here. There we go. A few words about goals in general. Every once in a while, somebody asks us, why do we do this? Why do we give away valuable stuff for free? Here's our intention. We want to provide this model that people can use as a starting point, and in such a way that if ever we had to interoperate with each other, we'd have at least a hope of it because we're starting from the same shared concepts. We also are using this as a platform to evolve and demonstrate what best practices really look like. It's been a kind of a fun journey there. And, one of the reasons we do this is just for our own branding and thought leadership. We don't do a lot of marketing, so this is one of our things. And if you use GIST, we're going to ask that, that your intention is probably to get your project started faster, to avoid some what we call rookie mistakes. We've spent a lot of time figuring out where we made mistakes and going back into GIST and try to change it a bit. We'll hear some of that today. And then, just showing up and having a discussion with your peers. A lot of times there's things to be learned in these. Okay. And one or two quick promises. We promise, if you ever worry that you're using an older version of GIST, we just got off the phone with somebody who's been using GIST 6.7 for 7 years now, but it's still out there and you can still use it. And if you ever, we're going to try to help them get caught up here soon, but everything we publish, we're going to leave out there where it can be downloaded. And of course you can keep a local copy if you like. We're going to solicit and record change requests. And as Rebecca mentioned, we're getting a more thorough process around that. We're going to continue to provide this as a free resource. And what we ask, if you use GIST, keep the GIST namespace with Semantic Arts and the domain name there, and the Creative Commons share-alike attribution. But you're free to use it to build whatever you'd like with it. With that, let me just see if there's a couple more people that just came in. Mark Van Berkel, do you want to introduce yourself? I was just mentioning you as a 7-year user of GIST 6.7.
Yes, thank you. A couple minutes late here, but yeah, been using it, and a lot of things have changed, especially through the 7s of the GIST versions, and we're trying to keep up, but it's interesting and a great resource. Thank you.
Great. And Dr. Sam calling in.
Hello, apologies for being late. Yes, I'm Sam Singapogo, Schneider Electric. We use GIST as an upper ontology for our product ontology specifications, product relationships, and configurations. And we're also doing some Schneider-wide semantic web consolidation efforts. So putting in GIST as a upper ontology and getting into IoT. So really interested around the IoT extension ontology as well. So yeah, excited to participate. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks much. Okay. So today's session, and I may run a bit over, but I realize if some of you guys have to drop at the top of the hour, I know that I got a little carried away when I got into this. That we're gonna cover events where I got carried away. We're also gonna get into process and workflow and things like that. But it'll all be recorded if you can't catch it all. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I decided to do this thing today. You know, how we can what we can learn from the design process, which we're going to talk about, some of the rationales and some of the implications. So a couple weeks ago, I was asked to attend an ontology design session of some consortium of people who are coming together to build, I think it was a product ontology, and they were going to have a session on events and asked me if I would sit in on it. They went on for an hour and had all kinds of interesting discussions about what an event was, and is it a continuant or not, and when is it, and all this stuff, and got to the end and didn't really get to any consensus. And I sent a note to the guy that asked me, and I found out that this was the 8th meeting they'd had on events, and they had several more planned. And I'm thinking, wow, that we use events all the time.
Or the end result not being right. So just, as you're maintaining those, keep in mind, like, try to make them as, like, consistent as possible.
Are you trying to talk to us, or is this some back chatter I'm hearing? Okay, whatever that was went away. That's good. Anyhow, we've used events a lot in GIST, and we haven't had to have 8 or 10 meetings to try and figure out what they are. And I thought, maybe I should use this as a learning opportunity to kind of rethink why is it that I think we're relatively all accord and have a common understanding of events without a lot of philosophical discussion. But we had one interesting protracted discussion about 6 months ago or a year ago, and I'm going to cover that when we get to it, which was kind of an interesting learning opportunity in and of itself. So so I want to kind of use this to go through, I think, kind of what our thought process mostly is, and how that led to the way events are in GIST. So when you think about it, designing and using an ontology is a social issue. We think of it as being a computer thing and it just has to work and all that kind of stuff. But really, a lot of it is, how do you get the largest number of people who are impacted by it to agree on what these things mean? We use formal definitions, but for some people that's hard to grok, because some of the people that need to align are developers who may not understand OWL, or business people who certainly don't. And so a lot of this is saying, how do we get individual people's mental models to align on these things? And it's hard because people say things, talk all the time, and you think that you're understanding and agreeing on things, but you don't know until you kind of test that. You can write up definitions and people read it, and if they think they knew what certain words used in your definition means, then they think they agreed with you, but very often that's not what's really going on. So our approach is not to start from something philosophical and hope that everyone agrees with that, because our observation has been they don't understand it and they don't necessarily agree to it. We try and start with concepts that already have a high degree of agreement. Um, Examples I've used in the past are person. There's almost a complete agreement on what a person is. And so we're going to use that thought process here as we go through events, and then kind of build up and check in. We added something. Do you still kind of understand and agree with this? And then every once in a while in these designs, there's some things you have to add that are contrived, but we try and layer them in just the right place and say, well, we have to make up something here. Can you buy into this or not? So here's me reconstructing the thought process of getting to GIST events. That the first thing to state is that it is possible to refer to a point in time. And this, actually I have a typo in this one. This is supposed to be 2020-02-13, 4 p.m. or 1600, which is Greenwich Mean Time. So for anybody who's dialed in, like Peter Winstanley would probably say, yep, that's what time it is right now, or it was 20 minutes ago. So it's possible to refer to a point in time on a timeline, and that, as far as we're concerned, XSD date time is totally adequate for referring to a point in time. And XSD date time relies on the Gregorian calendar, but so far in 20 years, we haven't found any user who needs any other calendar. Maybe, if we ever do a deal with archaeologists or paleontologists or NASA space scientists or something, it may need another calendar, but for a lot of everything we've encountered so far, Gregorian is fine. And for drawing pictures, we're going to say the past is to the left and the future is to the right. There is such of a thing as the past and the future. So I'm going to we haven't lost anyone yet. If any time anyone disagrees with this, just shout out. And I know you guys are not shy, but I do have a lot of material. Now, there's a lot of things that sound like dates or times, like 8 a.m. That sounds like a time, but you can't put it on a timeline because we don't know what date that is. And March 1st, you can't put it on a timeline because you don't know what year it is. The first Tuesday, there's all kinds of stuff that sounds like dates or times. None of them actually live on the timeline. And, for that reason, OWL doesn't recognize them. OWL's whole thing is just, we're going to have points in time on a timeline, and everything else, all these other bullet points, you have to figure out some other mechanism for dealing with them. The second concept we're going to come up with is this idea of universal and local time, that 1600 Greenwich time, which is universal time, is the exact same instant as 9 o'clock Denver time. So, if you dialed in to this meeting from London or Denver, the meeting started at the exact same instant in the world, even though Denver people said it was 9 o'clock. The London people know it's late in the afternoon. So that, everybody, I think, pretty much agrees with that. Now, here's the first point of departure. We have chosen in GIST to represent an instant in time as instances of a class time instant. So I'm going to show it as a triangle in most of these slides here, but it's kind of a convenience thing. We could just put all these XSD strings onto whatever we wanted to be dealing with, but we're finding that there's a lot of economy and things you can do when you attach things to the instant. So this particular instant, when this meeting started, was both, we can have two things attached to it, the universal time and the local time. And if you dialed in from India and you wanted to record your own local version, you would have an instant that was universal time with the Indian local time. We're adding a couple of other things to this instance because of other things we want to do later. One of them is the Unix epic millisecond time. I went out and looked it up. That is the correct Unix epic millisecond time for this time instant. And the reason we do that is it makes it a lot easier to do date math. Sparkle doesn't support date math, so you either have to go into proprietary extensions or whatever. And and we want to be able to refer to, while we say this is an instant, in some cases it's a timestamp, like in a computer system where we care about milliseconds. And even though, because of the XST date time, you're almost always implicitly recording milliseconds, we want to say, yeah, but this is when I entered my time. This is my time for today, or a meeting, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. It's really, I consider it to be precise to the nearest minute, or your birthday would be precise to a date, that allows us to do a little bit of fuzzy width on the instant. So now, if that's a way to record time, the next question is, why do we care about time in an information system? And most of the use cases are, we either want to record when something of interest occurred, or we're planning for it to occur, or we're just building calendars. To think, I haven't thought of any other use cases. Amazing, we can capture it all in those two little things. That's at least 90% of all of them. We'll if we think of a few others that don't fit these categories, we'll deal with it. So this thing on the left is whatever it was that occurred that we want to say something about, either when it occurred or when we hope it will occur. So we want to record this thing on the left, something happened that we are interested in. I'm going to provisionally call that thing on the left an event, but as you'll notice, I haven't really defined it yet. So it's sort of a proto event for the moment. By the way, some people distinguish events as being instantaneous, and something with a longer duration as being something else, activity, task, many other synonyms. We're not making that limitation. As far as we're concerned, this thing on the left can be instantaneous, or like a transaction, or it can occur over time. So the first distinction we like to make is between the past and the future, which is really between planning and actual. So our difference is that the past has already occurred. And the significance to that is you can't change what occurred. If last month's GIST council started 10 minutes late, you can't now decide, oh, well, let's have it chance to start on time. Or, you invited somebody you didn't want to invite. No, they were there. However, the difference is with a planned event or planned start time, you can change that. You can, you do what really anything you want about a planned event. Now, those two, yeah. Now these are names we came up with: actual and planned. Assume that's okay with everybody. We could have said historical and future, or I don't know. Well, the future is a little bit weird in that it's totally legitimate to talk about, your flight last week was planned to leave at 6 p.m. and it actually left at 7 p.m. So that is historical because it's in the past now, but at the time it was in the future. It was planned. That's why we call it plan and actual rather than historical and future. And so it isn't literally about the difference time now and future in the past, because like I said, like with the flight example, the other two distinctions we make for non-instantaneous events, which is most events. Somebody's needs to be muted, I think. Figure out who that is later. So we talk about when things start and when they end. Also kind of reasonable. Like last month's GIST council started at 9:10 Mountain Time and ended at 10 o'clock, roughly, Mountain Time. The start time needs to be before the end time, but we don't enforce that in the ontology. That's something you would need to enforce in an architecture. And the difference between the start and the end is essentially a duration of this. We're going to call it a proto event. Okay. Now, how we manifested this in GIST, we actually make 4 kind of low-level properties called actual start, planned start, actual end, planned end. And if necessary, they, well, they do roll up in a property hierarchy. In fact, they have multi-parents. If you refer to either the actual or the planned end, you're talking about when something ended or will end. Same with the starts. An actual or a planned start is an indication of an actual, historical thing, whereas the other two are planned things. Most of the time we use these light colored ones in the middle because they're more precise and you usually know which one you're referring to. So we still haven't said what an event is, but we're getting there soon, hopefully. And we're going to talk about what kind of events, but the last thing we have to deal with are time periods that aren't events. I said the second use case was calendar building. That just means I'm going to mark off time on a calendar without any event or activity, or there was nothing that happened that I was interested in. I just want to box a couple of dates and call it something. For instance, I might say that January 2019 goes from January 1, 2019 to January 31, 2019. In fact, I may say it goes to midnight on January 31st, or I may say it goes to midnight Greenwich Mean Time, or some definition of what that time period is. And from there, I think most people would rapidly, and we did, conclude that there are intervals. So pretty much every ontology I've ever looked at that includes time also has some kind of an interval, and certainly GIST did for most of its life. The W3C OWL time ontology has them. It's real easy to define. Seems like it might be useful, but I'm very much believing this now to be an anti-pattern. The first thing you get when you look at time intervals are the Alun functions. There's 13 Alun functions of whether this is before, overlapping, or containing, or finishing together, and all that. And they look so cool and so complete. But when you really think about it, these are 13 functions that you either have to implement as a function or create properties and instantiate them, which I just saw somewhere that was a suggestion, which seems like an odd idea. And the truth is they almost never get used in any actual system. What really happens is people take a date and say, was it in between these other two dates? Was it in this period? Not do these two things overlap or abut or anything like that. The actual comparison of a date to a range happens all the time. Did this accident occur during the warranty period? Well, what was the date of the accident? And when did the warranty period start and end? Or, I was just doing this the other day. We have a temporal thing for our billing rates. People change positions and over time. And so what date was this time charge? And therefore, what was the from and to on their billing rate then? The other, we accidentally found another anti-pattern that I wasn't expecting with this whole interval thing. And as we had this long argument, we finally figured out that it seems like about half of all ontologists think one way and half think another way. And here's those two ways. Half think that an event, whatever it is you memorialize that you're interested in, is an interval. And so this, my oval here is a subclass of that little interval I created between those two instants. The other half thinks that it has an interval. And while it linguistically doesn't sound like much of a distinction, it's a pretty big deal. You've got on the left really one URI, on the right two URIs. You got a URI of the event and a URI of the interval, and now presumably on the one on the right, you shouldn't put dates on the thing on the left. You should put it on the right, but which dates and why, and how do you keep that in sync? Seems to be a bit of an issue. And it turns out that, as near as I can tell, intervals without any event turns up so infrequently that we felt it was better just to eliminate intervals. And by eliminating, you get rid of ambiguity. In other words, that ambiguity was on the previous slide, that some people think that it is an event, some people think an event has one of those. And then we have to, but the stuff, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, we have to have a way of dealing with it. Special case that's less likely to get concerned. Here's a point of departure where you can easily disagree with what we come up to so far, because certainly owl time disagrees. In fact, virtually every time ontology I've ever seen disagrees with this conclusion. And if you really need to disagree with this, you can just take gist, add time intervals back in. But then it's up to you to deal with the ambiguity between the event. Is it an interval or does it have one? If you can really button that down and do it consistently, there you go. So,
question.
Yeah.
Since you allow instances to be arbitrarily fuzzy,
Yeah.
is there really a difference between the instance January 2020 and the time interval that's January 2020?
Yeah, that's that is a great question. We haven't worked out all the, I'm worried that we'll eventually get into something kind of like the Alun functions. In other words, if you just say, is January 1st before or after January 2nd, if they're both fuzzy, you'd say, yeah, it is before that. But if you say, is January 1st before this timestamp that was a very precise time, late on January 1st, then, I think we're going to have to, invent our own conclusions there. And they may, I don't know that they'll look exactly like the Alun functions, but, we may recreate some of that, but we haven't had to yet. But it's a great question.
Just as a comment, this is Michael Ushel. We had a case recently with a client where they made estimations of prices of things. And the assumption was that it corresponded to a particular date. Well, how do we do this? And so in the end, I thought, well, we have this precision thing in GIST. And so the date, January 17th, 2020 or whatever, can just view it as a time instant with precision of 24 hours. And everybody just thinks of the date. And so we figured that would work. So that's just a case where we used this in the client ontology. But as Dave said, we haven't worked out all the details, and whether some problem would arise is unknown at this time, but it seemed fine for the time period, for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine until you mix and match different precisions, and then,
yeah,
we're gonna have to.
That is extremely evil.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the case right now. Is 2020 week 5 before or after January 2020? And the answer is that week 5 begins on January 27th and ends on February 2nd. And weeks aren't real important in North America, but they matter a lot in Europe. So it's like, when you give up the idea of instances precise, you give up the idea of a proper comparison of them that always gives you an answer less than, equal to, or greater than.
Yep.
Which is kind of a lot to give up.
Yep. But I'm not sure what the I mean, one solution is just not to have any precision and everything is maximally precise. But then
what is maximally precise? I mean, at nuclear physics scales, that's like 10 to the minus 23rd seconds.
Yeah. But for us, it's milliseconds because nobody in an enterprise tracks anything less than a millisecond.
I wonder if they do now in date trading.
I wonder about the flash points. Weren't they nanoseconds?
In the book he only talked about milliseconds, but they probably are nanoseconds.
as I was saying, trading,
Yeah.
it often matters which trade came in first, and that can be arbitrarily precise, certainly down in nanoseconds.
Anyway, points
Yep.
points taken. You know, this is
Okay.
this is just kind of like Michael suggested. It's working right now. We got to watch out for a few edge cases here.
Right.
Coming back to the intervals, where intervals that aren't associated with events tend to come up is what I call calendar building, like June 20th, June 2020 is a block of time. Where it mostly comes up is in enterprise with people in their accounting periods. They have fiscal years and fiscal quarters and all that kind of stuff. And we're gonna suggest that when you need something like this, you just invent it, call it a fiscal period, and give it a start and an end date. Now that looks a heck of a lot like a time interval, which I'll agree it does look alike, but it does not create that same confusion because nobody has a conversation about whether an event is a fiscal period or an event has a fiscal period. They aren't even really very related at all. The event was the event, the fiscal period was the fiscal period, and people at least have a tendency not to argue that one too much. There's a few other, we do these all the time. We don't call them intervals. I mean, they could be intervals, but like any temporal relation, like the one I was saying earlier, if somebody is in a position from 2020 or 2010 to 2020 and then gets promoted or something, that there are start and end dates or effective dates or anything like that. We just put them on those things, or warranty periods, or when did legislation get implemented, when was it when was it sunsetted, when does it become effective. All those things sort of are intervals, but we seem to be better off just putting the dates on them and not trying to worry about whether they have intervals or whether they are intervals. So finally, I promised I would say what an event is. An event is something that has a start and an end. It started at some point, potentially ended at some point, and there's some reason you're interested in whatever it is you're describing here. And we say that it's characterized by a behavior. Now, let's see what that looks like. Typically, these behaviors are taxonomic lists that are very industry or use case specific. If you were building a to-do app, you might say my behaviors are meetings or being at work or taking breaks or vacation or whatever it is. If you're running an airline, you might say my behaviors are flights and refueling and maintenance and all that. So every time you talk about an event, you say, oh, that's a flight, a planned flight is this airplane that we characterize this activity as flying, or we characterize it as it's sitting on the ground refueling. Resource consumption, the taxonomy is things like time charges and expenses and chargeable, not chargeable, whatever it is. If you're a construction company, you might say your behaviors are designing and earthworks and foundation framing, and you can have these at any level of detail, a tree, a list, whatever. I'm just kind of giving some examples for how this plays out. In medicine, there's CPT codes. It says here's what you did at every step, every time and you're gonna have a bigger event. The patient visit to the hospital is one big event, but every little tiny event within that, this was CPT code 4715 or whatever it is. So that's what enterprises do. Individuals, if you wanted to do this, may say I have vacations, work, sleep, commute. Now we're going to get into we're going to start into the distinction, taking events and going into process and workflow.
Okay, before we get off events, I want to raise one other point.
Sure.
Which is that sometimes in the future, a date time doesn't do it. For example, if you look if you look at when an option expires, it expires on such and such a future date, 5 p.m. New York time. And the reason they do that is that, of course, Congress may mess with the time zones or the daylight savings time again. And then, we won't know what 5 p.m. New York time is until we get there.
That's a good one. Yeah.
So sometimes you need broken down times as fundamental. They can't always be deduced.
Yeah.
There's also the problem of leap seconds, which I assume you're ignoring.
I am, but yeah, you're right. That does exist. Yeah, that is a good one.
I mean, can't you just use we have, with this idea of defining time instance as an object, then we have data properties that hang off it. There's a local one. So, I mean, if you put that future date with a time zone offset, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, would that not be precise enough?
Well, the problem is architecturally, what we're suggesting is when you capture that and you're capturing it in a particular local time zone, you're doing two things simultaneously, getting the Greenwich time and getting the Unix epoch time. And as John said, for a future event, you may think the Unix epoch time is, but
based on lookup tables or whatever, but it could actually change.
Yeah. No, that's a good one.
Yeah. Okay.
Not only could it change, but the people who maintain the time zone data around the world that's used by everything except Windows issue about 8 a year. So it's constantly changing.
It is constantly changing. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
Yeah, so you may have to distinguish more clearly between past times and future times, as distinct from planned times. The idea handling planned and actual is good, but handling truly past and truly future is more difficult.
Yeah.
A future time will eventually have an accurate timestamp, but it may be the case that you can't afford to believe you think you know what it is.
That's right on. That's a good way to put it.
Dave, this is a lot analogous to what we've talked about over the years, specifications of time events, like each third Thursday of the month. It isn't a time instant, but it specifies once. This seems to be exactly the same thing. The New York time zone example seems to be exactly that. It maps to a time instant, but you don't know what that time instant is at the moment.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
I get that one. Why don't you know what the third Thursday of the month is?
Well, you can say third Thursday of the month as a specification, and you can map that to a time period, but it's convenient not to do so. It's convenient to simply use the specification, third Thursday of the month. And in your case, you literally don't know the time instant because you're saying New York, 5 o'clock New York time, blah, blah, blah. But that, because weird things can happen with time zones, you leave that unspecified.
Okay, well, what about having a class time specification then?
Yeah.
We've talked about that. Dave has talked about that many times over the years. I don't know if we've actually ever done it though.
No, I don't think we have. That's an interesting use case.
I actually have done it, and I will cheerfully send you the spec for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think we've always realized it's probably something we would have to do if we needed that particular. If we're doing that kind of a thing, but we haven't today.
Cool. Well, I think if I hustle, I might get all the way through process and workflows. Before the top of the hour, so let me give it a shot. When people talk about doing things like in manufacturing, you want to build something, you want to make a widget, and you execute. Maybe there's 5 steps in widget building, and every step, at least a first approximation, sounds like an event. Certainly, if we've already made the widget and it went through those 5 steps, then each step was an event and it was characterized by some behavior. We said, like, let's say this is, if you imagine a little Tinker Toy link, although I realized after I made these slides that you don't actually drill anything in the link. But one of the things that's important is this little description of how to build the link in a Tinker Toy isn't sufficient to actually build a Tinker Toy. You would have to say what piece of equipment and how long is the cut and a lot more detail. But at an approximate level, this is what you said happened. I cut, drilled, notched, sand, and stained this thing. So that might have been so we, given that we have that distinction between actual and planned, start and end, all those kind of things, we can create some pretty non-ambiguous classes. I think one of them is an historical event, is anything that is an event that has ended. A planned event is anything that we have planned. Now, it could have also happened. So in that case, it's both a planned and a historical event. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Contemporaneous event is something that started but hasn't ended. Like the current presidency or things like that, or if you're in the middle of a football game. But an owl, you can't actually infer things into that class because of the open world, but it's plenty easy to do in Sparkle. And then if you wanted to refer to an instantaneous event, remember earlier I said we weren't making a distinction between events and things that occur over time. As long as the start and the end were the same, as far as we're concerned, that's a instantaneous event. So the way planning and historical works, let's say I planned a trip to the British Virgin Islands. I don't know where my arrows are. Oh, there they go. So I might have said that in fact, I got my dates wrong because I'm going on this Sunday, but I would plan to start on the 27th. It's going to be a vacation. And, I can put stuff out and trip it. And those are planned events. There's the planned event of the shuttle bus picking me up and taking me down to the airport, things like that. In this domain, it makes total sense to take that event, the sailing trip to the British Virgin Islands, as things gradually become true, like, whoops, I guess I don't have any more. When I get on the first leg of the flight, it was another planned event. The flight was planned to leave at 1 a.m. and it actually left at 2 a.m. So there's a planned start and an actual start. But I'm adding the plan and actual stuff to the URI of this event, which is my vacation. It totally makes sense in this context that the event has both plan and actual attached to it. But there are some domains, like healthcare is one, I think, where you might plan the same visit many times. You might have multiple actual one plan. There are cases where you might literally want to have a separate URI for the plan and history, have them related, just so you could compare those. So you may have planned your quad repair and then actually have gotten your quad repaired on a different, not on the date you planned. And there are cases where you want to keep those separate.
Hey, Dave.
Yep.
This is Phil. Yep. I'm sure you're aware of the concept of length of stay and the ambiguity of deciphering that.
Yep. But I think, I think if you followed this through, you could get to either a precise definition or two or three precise definitions that people would have different names and say, okay, this is what I mean by length of stay in this case. Don't you think? Don't you think it would be possible to get to an unambiguous definition?
We still have those conversations because there are so many attributes to them, how you're defining that against what standard, either regulatory or financial or temporal. So it's just a complicated function. I just thought, because I'm sure you're aware of it.
Yeah. And you may have to have a different name for this regulation's length of stay, and this is this other, so that when you do refer to it, it's not ambiguous. It has to be grounded in something.
Hey, Dave, I'm not sure whether this is just an issue of naming the term planned event or whether there's an actual semantic distinction that needs to be made here, but there are events that are expected to occur in the future that I wouldn't call planned in the sense that a trip is planned, such as, a volcano is predicted to erupt on such and such a date. Would you call that a planned event, even though it's not intentionally planned?
Yeah, that's a good one. We used to, refer to some of them. You say very precisely. We know when Halley's Comet is going to come back. I guess that is planned, though. The other one that we didn't mention.
It's a plan without a planner, or if you want, you can say the planner is nature or God or whatever.
Right.
I think it's something similar with hypothetical events, and risks, things that might have bad things that might happen that you plan for.
Yeah.
It's all related.
Yeah. So
It's a great question.
we often have either contingent events, which, we know it will happen if this other thing happens, like a payout on insurance is a contingent event, contingent on your house burning down, but we don't plan when your house is going to burn down. And the same, like with Michael said, a hypothetical event is not even that tightly connected to its a known trigger. It just, we know that these bad things hypothetically may occur, and we want to reason about them. Okay.
Great question.
Yeah, that was a good one. Process and workflow. Then a lot of times we get asked why we don't have processes, activities, or workflow in GIST. We get asked that about once every 6 months. We have them. We don't call them process, activity, or workflow because what we've observed is people use those terms and they mean different things almost every time they use them. So when somebody says process, sometimes they mean what they've planned. Sometimes they mean what actually happens. Sometimes they mean what, generically what they intend. So we're going to kind of go through the things in GIST that actually implement these. Remember, with the Tinker Toy thing, we had cut, drill, notch, sand, stain. Looks a lot like a process flow. But if you look at it, you realize, well, there's no dates on this. There's no planned dates. There's no actual dates. Now, when you get an order, like for 100 Tinker Toys, you can instantiate whatever this thing is and put planned dates on them. Like, oh man, we got to get this out by Friday. Therefore, we better be sanding on Thursday and stuff like that. So this isn't a string of events. It kind of looks like a string of events. It looks like a string of behaviors, which are really categories. But if you took a bunch of categories and put a precedence diagram between them, all of a sudden you'd have a mess because then they wouldn't be reusable. Notching would always come after drilling, no matter what it was you were building. So you can't do that. What you really need to do is say we have these things. I hope I got this. Michael always corrects me because sometimes they say task template and sometimes they say template task. I never. Is this what it currently is, Michael?
It's a template.
Task template or template task?
Yep. It is a template, so it's a task template.
Okay, yep. Got it. So imagine you have these instances of this thing we're calling task template. And step one is characterized as, cutting things. And step two is drilling and three is, so now we've got a connection between this template and our high level description. Now, in reality, it's on step one, step two, and stuff where we put a lot more detail information about how you really do this. But at this level, we're just categorizing it. So now an order comes in to say, make me some Tinker Toys. You go find the Tinker, or no, this is there's a higher level task template called Make Tinker Toys, which is composed of those 5 steps. So then when an order shows up and somebody needs 100 Tinker Toys, we use this template to instantiate instances of another class that says, okay, I'm going to have to saw 100 links. And that sawing is characterized as cutting. And it's based on, I think, the step one. So if I needed to go find the instructions for how I cut Tinker Toy things, and it has a planned date. And we
What is step one an instance of? What are the steps instances of? Are they task templates?
exactly that little darker arrow is RDF.
So
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So this step one, step two, step three is what a lot of people talk about workflow design. You know, they're designing it in the abstract, doesn't have to do with it until you get an order or something, you instantiate it, and now you create things that are planned events. The red stuff are planned events, and they have dates on them, and but they do tie back to essentially the instructions. Step one is the instruction for how to cut long pieces of dowel into short pieces of dowel to make Tinker Toys out of. So that is how it works. And then obviously you can, when you actually saw them, you can say, oh yeah, I planned to saw them on Tuesday, but I really saw them on Wednesday, and I planned to do 100, but I did 110, and I had a reject, and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff would be actuals that are then attached either to the planned event or a separate event is connected to the plan.
Is there a way to specify precedence here? This must happen before that, but these other two things can happen in parallel. I don't care.
Yeah, I haven't shown it here. And a lot of times the better way to do precedence is not between the tasks, but between the inputs and the outputs of the tasks.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's like be informed.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. So here's, I am going to finish almost right on time. Hopefully we covered three things. How kind of our design approach and gist, which is, can we start with something that we mostly agree on and then build out from there rather than something philosophical? Whenever we come across something that's ambiguous, that we can't, it's obvious that it's going to stay ambiguous in the domain, and we just avoid that, because if you allow that to creep into the model, every conversation you have is going to have some ambiguity lurking. And then from there, we said every time instant that you care about is an instance of a class. There's four key relationships between this thing, this event, or this calendar manager, or this calendar interval, if you will, and those four key relationships are planned and actual and start and end. And events have at least one date and are characterized by some behavior. That's what it is that happened that you care about. And your planned events can evolve into historical ones by adding actual dates to them, or you can create two separate, the planned event, and have a separate actual event, historical event, and connect them. And workflow, the process, workflow, and activity are overloaded terms. What most people mean when they talk about process is this thing that we call the task template, but there has to be some kind of mechanism that turns that into, real definition of planned events and then eventually actual events. So that's it. Any final comments on any of that?
Would it make sense for task template to be a subclass of specification?
I think
so.
I think it might be. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
option. Yeah.
And the other question, going back to the beginning when you talked about calendars and that there was no need for calendars other than Gregorian. I mean, maybe we haven't encountered this yet, but I believe in the Muslim world, in some places, the Hijri calendar is still used in financial and banking services. And so it might be totally out of the question to have to think about it.
We're down to about 4 countries that don't use the Gregorian calendar officially. But
Okay.
yeah, you may be right that particular businesses use other calendars.
Yep.
Usually the right thing is considered to be to convert at the edge, in the UI. But that's obviously not going to work if you're dealing with, periods of lunar months.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this loan will be due in 50 lunar months. That's a totally different thing.
Right.
Yep.
Dave, could you elaborate on what you were saying about the economy of using time instance early in the presentation, as opposed to just being explicit with the XSD date times?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I guess the main economy is we're just bringing into one place uh, where we can relate the local time and the Greenwich time, the epic time, and the precision, and then we just have one thing to refer to. I think if we didn't have time in every place we're referring, we wanted to make a time reference, we have to be a little bit more disciplined to say, is this the Greenwich time? Is this the local time? Is this, in other words, I think it makes it easier to bake some of this stuff into the architecture because you just look, there is only one kind of thing. It's time instant. Then you can manage that.
Along those lines, this is Mark Wallace. I mean, and I know I'm a semantic arts guy, but I haven't been for all that long. So I just want to say that I applaud the kind of pragmatism of getting rid of time interval, and I say that because a lot of times as ontologists we can say there's a definite concept in the world called time interval, et cetera, but the bottom line is it creates some ambiguity as, okay, well, whenever, am I going to use a start and an end time, which are instants, or am I going to talk about time intervals? And as you mentioned, there's all these 13 comparisons. So, I applaud a group of ontologists making the pragmatic move to say, if we remove this concept that definitely exists in the world, we're going to make things way simpler and still be able to say everything we want to say. And the point of GIST versus a lot of other upper ontologies is it is small and concise, and and I just again, kind of a cheerleader to say that's somewhat unexpected sometimes. Sometimes ontologists aren't pragmatic enough, I don't think. So I know this was a move between GIST 8 and GIST 9. I know there's a lot of discussion about it, but as I consider implementation and all the ambiguities, well, now I've got to check for both intervals or instance and stuff. This really simplifies things a lot. So I think it was a good move.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I answered Mark's question in its entirety. In other words, there's a decision. We could just hang data properties,
right,
with dates on everything.
Right.
People and time intervals and all, and occasionally I do that when I get really sloppy. I don't
yeah,
time instant, but I don't know. I haven't articulated it very well, but I think there's something to be said for being incredibly consistent about doing it exactly one way, and you can bake it into the architecture then.
Yeah, I mean, one of your early slides, if Mark missed that, I know he joined a little bit late. Very early on, you kind of went through, why we chose to make this an object. And actually, I'm going through this with one client right now, where they've kind of had about 2 years of ontologizing, and they realize they've got a proliferation of date properties, and that's all they've got. And we're starting to counsel them kind of in the might be better sooner than later to normalize this on the time instant concept. And the main rationalization was there are multiple string representations for the same time. Let's put them on the same object, basically.
Yep.
So Dave, Peter here. Do we still have time periods in this?
Not in GIST. So we will in GIST accounting. For instance, we'll have financial periods, and we have things like temporal relations, which have an effective start and end date. So it's essentially a period, but we've avoided calling it a time interval because of the ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a period isn't it doesn't have any definition of start and end, but there are many arbitrary periods, a day, a week, an hour, a month.
Well, a day, a week, an hour, and a month are named durations.
Sorry?
Named
durations. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, yeah. So the thing about it is that we could work those two together so that you could have a start and a period.
Yep, absolutely. And which Sparkle doesn't support, which is the bummer. So I think.
No, it's a problem, whereas XML does.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah. So, you know, we're going to have to just take that on ourselves. I mean, a lot of the triple stores have extensions to do that, but you don't really want to rely on proprietary extensions. Although if you build your own, I guess it's proprietary as well.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what I had for today.
Question:
Yeah.
What's the best way to send email to GIST or to the GIST Council or to the people working on GIST?
Oh, that's a great question. Does anybody know? Melissa has a list, but is it?
I can always use the list of stuff that the list of people that that were copied on the email I get. I don't know if that's the appropriate thing, is it?
Yeah. Until anybody starts spamming people, I'll say, yeah, go ahead. And I know you won't. So.
Depending on what the purpose of the email is, we've been encouraging people, if it's requests or suggestions for GIST, we've been encouraging people to enter them as issues in the Git repository.
Okay,
via email.
Okay.
Yeah, but if it's purely informative, you could.
Yeah.
No, I'll send you my spec for the time.
Yeah. Excellent.
The time description that way.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, the good news is, I think, that we don't have to have 9 more meetings to figure out what an event is. I hope that is the conclusion of this.
Oh, maybe I missed it. Was there talk about recurring events like the GIST Council meeting?
Yeah. No, but they are another. Michael mentioned it briefly. They are another form of specification. Yep.
Okay.
We're going to have it first Tuesday of the month, and then set it up to recur.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's interesting in Outlook, you say that you do say every week, every Thursday, and Outlook does that mapping for you. It literally converts the specification that you gave it into actual times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Dave.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That was enlightening. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Thank you.